Story 1. By myself. At one point, I was the kind of guy to suffer sleep paralysis. I wasn't very spiritually close to God, wasn't careful who I hung out or associated with, and was thus dissolute. Not a full-on degenerate gambler or drug addict, but just dissipating my way through life. There was an off energy about me that somehow only got worse. Independent of myself, it was like something always pushed me to do worse. Something always pushed me to push the envelope. Something always pushed me to slot into even greater degeneracy. And one particular night, things really did slot together. I was asleep. My sleep tended to vary at this stage in life, sometimes being full, sometimes being fragile, sometimes fathomlessly hard, but I was sleeping and had just woken up. I had definitely woken up, because even though I was still a little drowsy and hadn't completely woken up, I was awake enough that I could definitely perceive and understand everything around me. And that's when the heavy feeling came in. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. It was this heavy, smothering feeling, like the atmosphere around me had become very stuffed, very stodgy, very slovenly, very hostile. At first it felt like a warm, mugged up, messed up room, the kind of room where a radiator's left on. But then the heat turned right up. I gasped. Something jumped on top of me, like a small woman. Now, I'm not out of my mind. I can feel weight on my body and know what a person weighs, and it felt like a small person sat right on my chest. But their energy was not small. Suddenly, I felt myself being throttled, as in completely and utterly throttled. Something, with hands, was squeezing the living daylights out of me, fiercely and ferociously. I opened my mouth to scream, and no sound came out, because something jammed in it. To this day, I have no idea what it was. Was this an object? Was it a person? Was it a hand? But something jammed in my mouth, and prevented it shutting. It felt like a huge, bulky French baguette had been shoved in there. I could not close my mouth. I felt something pushing down my throat, and then pushing up and down, on top of me. Oh God, I thought. It's possessing me. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. I could feel it possessing me. Feel it trying to shove itself inside of me, both through my mouth and down onto my stomach. It was forcing itself up and down on me, pushing me with a huge force that vastly outmatched its seemingly small form. A form I couldn't see, because visibly there was nothing there. Yet at the same time it felt like it was possessing me. It was strangling and strangling me so viciously I thought I was dying. I could feel myself dying. I knew I was. The way it squeezed the life out of me was nothing short of atrocious. God, please help me, I began to pray. Please help me. I'm not even a religious person. I have immense respect for religion, but have never managed to become religious. But still I prayed, please help me. Please help me. Over and over again, beseeching him for an answer. And he answered. The invisible person's grip began to dissipate. My mouth became movable. My throat became unblocked. Slowly, slowly, they faded away, and with them faded the awful, ominous, aggressive vibe of the room. Everything became peaceful, kind, contented, like it once was. I've since come to learn about what some people call jinns, what others call genies, what others call spirits, and what others call spirit guides. The people of the unseen, who can see you from where you can't see them. The people that can move around you in ways you can't move. The people who can shift into shapes to fool you, and the people who, like humans, can shift the world for good or for evil. And let me tell you, something very, very evil shifted into my life that day. Story 2. A continuation of Story 1. The evil force that shifted into my life hasn't entirely shifted out of it. Ever since certain events happened, I've become a more spiritual person, more aware of God. I saged my room multiple times, I prayed to God more often, I prayed for those around me, and I kept away from certain degenerate energies that could draw more energies in. I've often read that positive spirits are drawn to positive energy, and negative ones to negative energy. A person blooming with negative emotions will often have negative energy blossom around him, a person doing evil deeds will have evil things grow around him, and in certain buildings, basements and houses where evil or awful things have happened, bad things will inhabit there, nestling away through the ages. It wasn't ages longer where in the same house I'd had the experience, my mother did too. Now, this house has never had a horrible event happen in it, as far as I know. It's never had a marauder, never had a murder, never had a monster inhabit it, much less operate out of it. It's not a notorious house, where someone killed someone hurt someone, or someone did horrible stuff. This isn't some kind of Amityville level place. It's just a nice country cottage, a bit run down and desperately in need of maintenance, but it's much like my life, so we're in kind of a standoff here. But the relative peace I suffered since the event did not last for long. My mother is a woman who's often stressed, known for sleeping more on a couch than the bed. In fact, the last time she slept in a bed was probably months and months ago, if not a year. She just, at the end of the day, racked by worries and woes, tends to fall asleep peacefully on the sofa. Or not so peacefully. Things in this house can sometimes feel a little off, and one day they certainly felt off. As she was dozing midday, as she sometimes does to cope, she felt frozen. Not with fear, but quite literally frozen. She couldn't move, but something moved beside her. As the room shifted to be filled with the fog of fear, a small, seething little physical form snuggled up to her. That's what she remembers so vividly. It snuggled up to her, cuddling, as if trying to be cute or comforting, but it was not cute or comforting. In fact, it was as if it were trying to make a mockery of her, feigning reassurance while being only revolting. She described it as wet, as if it had been in a river, as if it was slimy and slippery all over, like some kind of reptile. And so it continued, cuddling right up to her back, and so she continued, to be able to do nothing, only mumbling coherently. "Mm-mm-mm," she moaned. "Mm-mm-mm," trying to get my dad's attention, and my dad did hear, but chalked it up to bad dreams or something. He's not one to believe in anything spiritual or paranormal, so by the time he woke up, her telling him had the same effect as not telling him at all. Maybe he should be worried though, because at one point when she woke up, she saw his disembodied head float through the living room. Float, as if it were a living head, supported by no body, traversing from one room to the other. Maybe with an invisible body, carrying it. Story 3, also by me. I might have given you the impression that my house is some kind of demon disco, or ghoul garage, but honestly, most of the time it's bizarrely peaceful. There's little in the way of horrible or horrifying stuff, and in the surrounding countryside less so. And it's in this very countryside, back in the summer, as I decided to take one of my long 3-mile walks to think things through. I've always done this, and especially back then, when I was less mentally stable than the average person, and needed something to get me through the day. Like many anxious people, it helped to always be doing something, always be on the move in some way, be it doodling, drawing, writing or hiking, and the latter, as I've rather gloriously described my walks down paved roads and through woods, was little pastime of mine, anything to get me out of the house and stop me indulging in degeneracy. And so, with no debauchery whatsoever on my mind, I danced out of the door and went striding through the countryside, through this little village called Forest, past the woods, past the swamp and back home, through this route through some farmers' fields. The evening was coming in, and while darkness was gathering, it certainly wasn't gathering enough to make the grass gnash, the branches bite, or the stream salivate, as if something was after my blood. But it sounded like something was. The panting just hit me, just behind my neck, like a huge, brutish, bipedal something, or something my height, was rapidly approaching from behind, heaving like it had just ran heavily, inhaling and exhaling like it was ready to stop. Or strike. Defensively, I spun round at the first moment. I've never been a very trusting person, partly due to trauma and partly due to a natural awareness of the evils people are capable of. I don't trust easily, I don't like people behind me, so I spun round, ready to fight or flight. But not one thing was there. Not one thing. No being, no body, no animal, no aggressor. Not one trace of anything was there, even though I knew I felt something. And still did. The atmosphere around me felt eerie, ominous, unwelcoming. Quickly, I headed home, feeling unsettled for a little while, looking over my shoulder now and then to make sure I wasn't being ambushed. But honestly, it was one of the most thrilling, fascinating experiences of my life. At last, a genuine paranormal manifestation. First the quotes, sleep paralysis, then this. The spiritual side of me was horrified, but the curious side of me was intrigued. More than intrigued, and certainly hungry for more, so I had to stymie that hunger by refusing to go looking for whatever it was. I still don't know what pushed me into fight or flight, but whatever it was took flight easily. Or did it? Was it there, watching me from the undergrowth? And why did it take such a perverse pleasure in making me afraid? I really, really don't want to find out. Or do I? Story 4 by Bowman. Bowman is the name Teddy Roosevelt gave to an individual who he claims was a hunter he knew, who told him a chilling, terrifying tale. It sounds like a Bigfoot story in and of itself, but the viciousness and vicarious fear makes it sound more like a dogman, or a demon. I'll tell the story, in Roosevelt's voice, and let you lot make up your minds. I have heard but few ghost stories while living on the frontier, and those few were of a perfectly commonplace and conventional type. But I once listened to a goblin story, which rather impressed me. A grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bowman, who, born and had passed all his life on the frontier, told the story to me. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of the tale. But he was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtlessly been saturated with all kinds of ghosts and goblin lore. So many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men, of the snow walkers, and the spectres, and the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths, and dog and waylay the lonely wanderer who, after nightfall, passes through the regions where they lurk. It may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute, both at the time, and still more in remembrance, weird and elfin traits, to what was merely some abnormally wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was true or not, no man can say. When the event occurred, Bowman was still a young man, and was trapping with a partner along the mountains, dividing the forks of the Salmon from the head of the Wisdom River. Not having had much luck, he and his partner decided to go up into a particularly wild and lonely pass, which ran through a small stream and was said to contain many beavers. The pass had an evil reputation, because the year before, a solitary hunter who wandered into it was slain, seemingly by a wild beast, the half-eaten remains being found afterward by some mining prospectors, who had passed his camp only the night before. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers, who were as adventurous and hardy as others of their kind. They took their two mountain ponies to the front of the pass, where they left them in an open beaver meadow, the rocky timber-clad ground being from then on impracticable for horses. They then struck out on foot through the vast gloomy forest, and in about 4 hours reached a little open glade, where they continued to camp, as signs of game were plenty. There was still an hour or two of daylight left, and after building a little brush lean-to, and throwing down and opening their packs, they started upstream. The country was very dense, and hard to travel through, as there was much down timber, although here and there the sombre woodland was broken by small glades of mountain grass. At dusk, they again reached camp. The glade in which it was pitched was not many yards wide, the tall, close-set pines and firs rising up it like a wall. On one side was a little stream, beyond which rose the steep mountain slope, covered with the unbroken growth of evergreen forest. They were surprised to find that during their absence, something, apparently a bear, had visited their camp, and had rummaged among their things, scattering the contents of their packs, and in sheer wantonness destroyed their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores and setting the fire. While Bowman was making ready supper, it being already dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along a game trail after leaving the camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by it a minute or two, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, "Bowman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs." Bowman laughed at this, but his partner insisted he was right, and upon examining the tracks with a torch, they certainly did seem to be made by 2 paws or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being, and coming to the conclusion they could not be, the 2 men rolled up their blankets and went to sleep under the lean-to. At midnight, Bowman was awakened by some noise, and sat up in his blankets. As he did so, his nostrils were struck by a strong wild beast odour, and he caught the loom of a great body, in the darkness, at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of the undergrowth, as the thing, whatever it was, rushed off into the impenetrable blackness of the forest and night. After this, the 2 men slept but little, sitting up by the rekindled fire, but they heard nothing more. In the morning, they started to look at the few traps they'd set the previous evening, and put out new ones. By unspoken agreement, they kept together all day, and returned to the camp toward evening. On nearing it, they saw, hardly to their astonishment, the lean-to had again been torn down. The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and in wanton malice had tossed about their camp kit and bedding, and destroyed the shanty. The ground was marked up by its tracks, and on leaving the camp, it had gone along the soft earth by the brook. The footprints were plain as if on snow, and after a careful scrutiny of the trail, it did seem as if, whatever this thing was, had walked off on but 2 legs. The men, although uneasy, gathered a great heap of dead logs, and kept up a roaring fire throughout the night, one and the other sitting on guard most of the time. About midnight, the thing came down through the forest opposite, across the brook, and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a peculiarly sinister sound, yet it did not venture near the fire. In the morning, the 2 trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided they would shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were more than ready to do this, because in spite of seeing a good deal of game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary first to go along the line of the traps and gather them, and this they started to do. All the morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch after they passed, and now and then there were slight rustling noises, along small pines to one side of them. At noon, they were back within a couple of miles of camp. In the high bright sunset, their fears seemed absurd to the 2 armed men, accustomed as they were, through long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness, to face every kind of danger from man, brute or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond, in a wild ravine nearby. Bowman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp, and made ready the packs. On reaching the pond, Bowman found 3 beavers in the traps, one of which had pulled loose, and carried into a beaver house. He took several hours in securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homeward, he marked, with some uneasiness, how low the sun was getting. As he hurried toward camp, under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed on him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and the slanting sun rays, striking along through the straight trunks, made a grey twilight, in which objects, at a distance, glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the gloomy stillness, which, when there is no breeze, always broods over these sombre primeval forests. At last he came to the edge of the little glade, where the camp lay, and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though the thin, blue smoke was still curling upwards. Near it lay the packs, wrapped and arranged. At first Bowman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so, his eyes fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing toward it, the horrified trapper found the body was still warm, but the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in the throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log, with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods, to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps and seemingly on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck, by wrenching his head back with its forepaws, while it buried its teeth in his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gambolled about it in uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling over and over it, and had then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. Bowman, utterly unnerved, and believing the creature with which he had to deal was something either half human or half devil, abandoned everything but his rifle, and struck off at speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows, where the hobbled ponies were still gazing. Mounting, he rode onward through the night, until beyond reach of pursuit. And so concludes this unsettling, terrifying story. Bigfoot is usually portrayed as a gentle giant, but whatever this thing was, while gigantic, it was utterly monstrous, with a spoonful of sociopathy to boot. I don't know if this story is true, but if it is, you can bet that woodsman never ventured into the woods again. Story 5 by Albert Osman. I have always followed logging and construction work. This time, I had worked over 1 year on a construction job, and thought a good vacation was in order. British Columbia is famous for lost gold mines. One is supposed to be at the head of the Toba Inlet. Why not look for this mine and have a vacation at the same time? I took the Union steamship boat to Lund. From there, I hired an old Indian to take me to the head of the Toba Inlet. This old Indian was a very talkative old gentleman. He told me stories about gold brought out by a white man from this lost mine. This white man was a very heavy drinker, spent his money freely in saloons, but he had no trouble getting more money. He would be away a few days, then come back with a bag of gold. But one time, he went to his mine, and never came back. Some people said a Sasquatch had killed him. At that time, I had never heard of Sasquatch, so I asked what kind of animal he called Sasquatch. The Indian said, "They have hair all over their bodies, but they are not animals. They are people, big people, living in the mountains. My uncle saw the tracks of one that were 2 feet long. One old Indian saw one over 8 feet tall." I told the Indian I didn't believe in their old fables about mountain giants. It might have been some thousands of years ago, but not nowadays. The Indian said, "There may not be many, but they still exist." We arrived at the head of the inlet, about 4 p.m. I made camp at the mouth of a creek. The Indian had supper with me, and I told him to look out for me in about 3 weeks. I would be camping at the same spot where I came back. Next morning, I took my rifle with me, but left my equipment at the camp. I decided to look around for some deer trail to lead me up into the mountains. On the way up the inlet, I had seen a pass in the mountain that I wanted to go through, to see what was on the other side. I spent most of the forenoon looking for a trail, but found none, except for a hogback running down to the beach. So I swapped out a trail from there, got to my camp about 3 p.m, and made up my pack to be ready in the morning. My equipment consisted of one 30-30 Winchester rifle. I had a special homemade prospecting pick, axe on one end, pick on the other. I had a leather case for this pick, which fastened to my belt, also my sheath knife. The storekeeper at Lund was cooperative. He gave me some cans for my sugar, salt and matches, to keep them dry. My grub consisted mostly of canned stuff, except for a side of bacon, a bag of beans, 4 pounds of prunes and 6 packs of macaroni, cheese, 3 packs of pancake flour and 6 packs of Rye King hardtack, 3 rolls of snuff, 1/4 seal of butter, and 2 1-pound cans of milk. I had 2 boxes of shells for my rifle. The storekeeper gave me a biscuit tin. I put a few things in that, and cached it under a waterfall, so I would have it when I came back here, waiting for a boat to bring me out. My sleeping bag, I rolled up and tied on the back of my backpack, together with my ground sheet, small frying pan, and 1 aluminum pot that held about 1 gallon. As my canned food was used, I would get plenty of empty cans to cook with. The following morning, I had an early breakfast, made up my pack, and started out this hogback. My pack must have been at least 80 pounds, beside my rifle. After 1 hour, I had to rest. I kept resting and climbing all that morning. About 2 p.m, I came to a flat place, below a rock bluff. There was a bunch of willow in one place. I made a wooden spade, and started digging for water. About 1 foot down, I got to seepings of water, so I decided to camp here for the night, and scout about for the best way to get on from here. I must have been near to 1,000 feet. There was a most beautiful view over the islands, and the strait. Tugboats with long booms and fish going in all directions. A lovely spot. I spent the following day prospecting around, but no sign of minerals. I found a deer trail leading toward this pass that I had seen on my way up the inlet, and the following morning I started out early, while it was cool. It was steep climbing with my heavy pack. After a 3-hour climb, I was tired and stopped to rest. On the other side of a ravine, from where I was resting, was a yellow spot, below some small trees. I moved over there and started digging for water. I found a small spring and made a small trough from a cedar bark and got a small amount of water, had my lunch and rested here till evening. I made it over the pass late that night. Now I had downhill, and good going, but I was hungry and tired, so I camped at the first bunch of trees I came to. I was trying to size up the terrain, what direction I would take from here. Toward west would lead to lowland and some other inlet, so I decided to go in a northeast direction. Had good going and slight downhill all day. I must have made 10 miles when I came to a small spring and a big black hemlock tree. This was a lovely campsite. I spent 2 days here, just resting and prospecting. The first night here, I shot a small deer. 2 days later, I found an exceptionally good campsite. It was 2 good-sized cypress trees, growing close together, and near a rock wall, with a nice spring just below those trees. I intended to make this my permanent camp. I cut lots of brush for my bed between these trees. I rigged up a pole from this rock wall to hang my packsack on, and arranged some flat rocks for my fireplace for cooking. I had a really classy setup, And that is when things started to happen. I'm a heavy sleeper. Not much disturbs me after I go to sleep, especially in a good bed like I had now. Next morning, I noticed things had been disturbed during the night, but nothing missing I could see. I roasted my grouse on a stick for breakfast. That night, I filled up the magazine of my rifle. I still had 1 box of 20 shells and 6 shells in my coat pocket. That night, I laid my rifle under the edge of my sleeping bag. I thought a porcupine had visited me the night before, and porkies like leather, so I put my shoes in the bottom of my sleeping bag. Next morning, my pack sack had been emptied out. Someone had turned the sack upside down. It was still hanging on the pole, from the shoulder straps, as I had hung it up. Then I noticed 1 half-pound pack of prunes was missing. Also, my pancake flour was missing, but my salt bag was not touched. Porkies always look for salt, so I decided it must have been something else than porkies. I looked for tracks but found none. I did not think it was a bear. They always tear up and make a mess of things. I kept close to camp in these days, in case this visitor would come back. I climbed up on a big rock, where I had a good view of the camp, but nothing showed up. I was hoping it would be a porky, so I would get a good porky stew. These visits had been going on for 3 nights. This night, it was cloudy and looked like it might rain. I took special note of how everything was arranged. I closed my pack sack, I did not undress, I only took off my shoes and put them in the bottom of my sleeping bag. I drove my prospecting pick into one of the cypress trees so I could reach it from my bed. I also put the rifle alongside me, inside my sleeping bag. I fully intended to stay awake all night, to find out who my visitor was, but I must have fallen asleep. I was awakened by something picking me up. I was half asleep, and at first I did not remember where I was. As I began to get my wits together, I remembered I was on this prospecting trip, and in my sleeping bag. My first thought was it must be a snowslide, but there was no snow around my camp. Then it felt like I was tossed on horseback, but I could feel whoever it was walking. I tried to figure out what kind of animal this could be. I tried to get at my sheath knife and cut my way out, but I was in an almost sitting position, and the knife was under me. I could not get hold of it, but the rifle was in front of me. I had a good hold of that, and no intention to let go of it. At times, I could feel my pack sack touching me, and could feel the cans in the sack touching my back. After what seemed like an hour, I could feel we were going up a steep hill. I could feel myself rise for every step. What was carrying me was breathing hard, and sometimes gave a slight cough. Now I knew this must be one of the mountain Sasquatch giants the Indians told me about. I was in a very uncomfortable position, unable to move. I was sitting on my feet, and one of the boots in the bottom of the bag was crossways with the hobnail sole, up across my foot. It hurt me terribly, but I could not move. It was very hot inside. It was lucky for me this fellow's hand was not big enough to close up the whole bag when he picked me up. There was a small opening at the top, otherwise I would have choked to death. Now he was going downhill. I could feel myself touching the ground at times, and at one time he dragged me behind him, and I could feel he was below me. Then he seemed to get on level ground, and was going at a trot for a long time. By this time, I had cramps in my legs. The pain was terrible. I was wishing he would get to his destination soon. I could not stand this type of transport much longer. Now he was going uphill again. It didn't hurt me so bad. I tried to estimate distance and directions. As near as I could guess, we were about 3 hours travelling. I had no idea where he started, as I was asleep when he picked me up. Finally, he stopped and let me down. Then he dropped my pack sack. I could hear the cans rattle. Then I heard chatter, some kind of talk I didn't understand. The ground was sloping, so when he let go of my sleeping bag, I rolled downhill. I got my head out and got some air. I tried to straighten my legs and crawl out, but my legs were numb. It was still dark. I could not see what my captors looked like. I tried to massage my legs, to get some life into them, and get my shoes on. I could now hear it was at least 4 of them. They were standing about me, and continuously chattering. I had never heard of Sasquatch before the Indian told me about them, but I knew I was right among them. But how to get away from them? That was another question. I got to see the outline of them now, as it began to get lighter, though the sky was cloudy and it looked like rain. In fact, there was a slight sprinkle. I now had circulation in my legs, but my left foot was very sore on top, where it had been resting on my hobnail boots. I got my boots out from the sleeping bag and tried to stand up. I found I was wobbly on my feet, but had a good hold of my rifle. I asked, "What do you fellows want with me?" only some more chatter. It was getting lighter now, and I could see them quite clearly. I could make out forms of 4 people, 2 big and 2 little ones. They were all covered with hair, and no clothes at all. I could now make out mountains all around me. I looked at my watch. It was 4:25 a.m. It was getting lighter now, and I could see the people clearly. They looked like a family. Old man, old lady and 2 young ones, a boy and a girl. The boy and the girl seemed to be scared of me. The old lady did not seem too pleased about what the old man dragged home. But the old man was waving his arms and telling them all what he had in mind. They all left me then. I had my compass and my prospecting glass on strings around my neck, the compass in my left-hand shirt pocket and my glass in my right-hand pocket. I tried to reason our location and where I was. I could see now I was in a small valley or basin, about 8 or 10 acres, surrounded by high mountains. On the southeast side there was a V-shaped opening, about 8 feet wide at the bottom, and about 20 feet high at the highest point. That must be where I came in. But how will I get out? The old man was now sitting near this opening. I moved my belongings up close to the west wall. There were 2 small cypress trees there, and this will do for a shelter for the time being, until I find out what these people want with me and how to get away from here. I emptied out my pack sack to see what I had left in the line of food. All my canned meat and vegetables were intact, and I had 1 can of coffee. Also, 3 small cans of milk, 2 packages of Rye King hardtack, and my butter sealer, half full of butter. But my prunes and macaroni were missing. Also, my box full of shells for my rifle. I had my sheath knife, but my prospecting pick was missing. And my can of matches. I only had my safety box full, and held only about a dozen matches. That didn't worry me. I can always start a fire with my prospecting glass when the sun is shining, if I have dry wood. I wanted hot coffee, but I had no wood. Also, nothing around here that looked like wood. I had a good look over the valley where I was, but the boy and the girl were always watching me from behind some juniper bush. I decided there must be some water around here. The ground was leaning toward the opening in the wall. There must be water at the upper end of this valley. There's green grass and moss along the bottom. All my utensils were left behind. I opened my coffee tin and emptied the coffee in a dish towel and tied it with the metal strap from the can. I took my rifle and the can and went looking for water. Right at the head under a cliff, there was a lovely spring that disappeared underground. I got a drink and a full can of water. When I got back, the young boy was looking over my belongings, but didn't touch anything. On my way back, I noticed where these people were sleeping. On the east side wall of this valley was a shelf, in the mountainside, with overhanging rock, looking like a big undercut in a big tree, about 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide. The floor was covered with lots of dry moss, and they had some kind of blankets, woven of narrow strips of cedar bark, packed with dry moss. They looked very practical and warm, with no need of washing. The first day, not much happened. I had to eat my food cold. The young fellow was coming nearer me, and seemed curious about me. My 1 snuff box was empty, so I relayed it toward him. When he saw it coming, he sprang up quick as a cat, and grabbed it. He went over to his sister, and showed her. They found out how to open and close it. They spent a long time playing with it. Then he trotted over to the old man, and showed him. They had a long chatter. Next morning, I made up my mind to leave this place, if I had to shoot my way out. I could not stay much longer. I only had enough grub to last me till I got back to the Toba Inlet. I did not know the direction, but I would go downhill, and I would come out near civilization someplace. I rolled up my sleeping bag, put that inside my pack sack, packed the few cans I had, swung the sack on my back, injected the shell into the barrel of my rifle, and started for the opening in the wall. The old man got up, held up his hands, as though he would push me back. I pointed to the opening. I wanted to go out. But he stood there, pushing toward me, and said something that sounded like, "Soka, Soka." I backed up to about 60 feet. I did not want to be too close, I thought, if I had to shoot my way out. A 30-30 might not have much effect on this fellow. It might make him mad. I only had 6 shells, so I decided to wait. There must be a better way than killing him in order to get out from here. I went back to my campsite to figure some other way out. I could make friends with the young fellow or the girl. They might help me. If only I could talk to them. Then I thought of a fellow who saved himself from a mad bull by blinding him with snuff in his eyes. But how will I get near enough to this fellow to put snuff in his eyes? So I decided, next time I gave the young fellow my snuff box, to leave a few grains of snuff in it. He might give the old man a taste of it. But the question is, in what direction will I go, if I should get out. I must have been near 25 miles northeast of Toba Inlet when I was kidnapped. This fellow must have travelled at least 25 miles in the 3 hours he carried me. If he went west, we would be near saltwater. Same thing if he went south. Therefore, he must have gone northeast. If I then kept going south, and over 2 mountains, I must hit saltwater, someplace between London and Vancouver. The following day, I did not see the old lady until about 4 p.m. She came home with her arms full of grass and twigs, and all kinds of spruce and hemlock, as well as some kinds of nuts that grow in the ground. I have seen lots of them on Vancouver Island. The young fellow went up the mountain to the east every day. He could climb better than a mountain goat. He picked some kinds of grass with long, sweet roots. He gave me some one day. They tasted very sweet. I gave him another snuff box with about a teaspoon of snuff in it. He tasted, then went to the old man. He licked it with his tongue. They had a long chat. I made a dipper from a milk can. I made many dippers. You can use them for pots too. You cut 2 slits near the top of any can, then cut a limb from any small tree, cut back down the limb toward the stem of the tree, then taper the part you cut from the stem. Then cut a hole in the tapered part, slide the tapered part in the slit you have made in the can, and you have a good handle on your can. I threw one over to the young fellow that was playing near my camp. He picked it up and looked at it, and he went to the old man and showed it to him. They had a long chatter. Then he came to me, pointed at the dipper, then at his sister. I could see that he wanted one for her too. I had other peas and carrots, so I made one for his sister. He was standing only 8 feet from me. When I had made the dipper, I dipped it in water and drank from it. He was very pleased, almost smiled at me. Then I took a chew of snuff, smacked my lips, said that's good. The young fellow pointed to the old man and said something that sounded like ook. I got the idea that the old man liked snuff, and the young fellow wanted a box for the old man. I shook my head. I motioned with my hands for the old man to come to me. I do not think the young fellow understood what I meant. He went to his sister and gave her the dipper I made for her. They did not come near me again that day. I had now been here 6 days, but I was sure I was making progress. If only I could get the old man to come over to me, get him to eat a full box of snuff that would kill him for sure, and that way, kill himself. I wouldn't be guilty of murder. The old lady was a meek old thing. The young fellow was by this time quite friendly. The girl would not hurt anybody. Her chest was flat like a boy's. No development like young ladies. I am sure if I could get the old man out of the way, I could easily have brought the girl with me to civilization. But what good would that have been? I would have to keep her in a cage for public display. I don't think we have any right to force our way of life on other people, and I don't think they would like that. The noise and racket in a modern city, they wouldn't like any more than I do. The young fellow must have been about 11 to 18 years old, and about 7 feet tall, and might weigh about 300 pounds. His chest would be 50 to 59 inches, his waist about 36 to 38 inches. He had wide jaws, narrow forehead, that slanted upward round the back, about 4 or 5 inches higher than the forehead. The hair on their heads was about 6 inches long. The hair on the rest of their body was short, and thick in places. The woman's hair on the forehead had an upward turn, like some women have. They call it bangs among women's hairdos. Nowadays, the old lady could have been anything between 40 to 70 years old. She was over 7 feet tall. She would be about 500 to 600 pounds. She had very wide hips and a goose-like walk. She was not built for beauty or speed. The man's eye teeth were longer than the rest of his teeth, but not long enough to be called tusks. The old man must have been near 8 feet tall. Big barrel chest, big hump on his back, powerful shoulders. His biceps on his upper arm were enormous and tapered down to his elbows. His forearms were longer than common people have, but well proportioned. His hands were wide, the palm was long and broad, and hollow like a scoop. His fingers were short, in proportion to the rest of his head. His fingernails were like chisels. The only place they had no hair was inside their heads, and the soles of their feet, and the upper part of the nose and eyelids. I never did see their ears. They were covered with hair hanging over them. If the old man were to wear a collar, it would have to be at least 30 inches. I had no idea what size shoes they would need. I was watching the young fellow's foot one day when he was sitting down. The soles of his feet seemed to be padded like a dog's foot, and the big toe was longer than the rest, and very strong. In mountain climbing, all he needed was footing for his big toe. They were very agile. To sit down, they turned their knees out and came straight down. To rise, they came straight up, without help of hands or arms. I don't think this valley was their permanent home. I think they moved from place to place, as food is available in different localities. They might eat meat, but I never saw them eat meat, or do any cooking. I think this was probably a stopover place, and the plants with sweet roots on the mountainside might have been in season this time of year. They seem to be most interested in them. The roots have a very sweet and satisfying taste. They always seemed to do everything for a reason, wasted no time on anything they did not need. When they were not looking for food, the old man and the old lady were resting, but the boy and the girl were always climbing something or some other exercise. A favourite position was to take hold of his feet with his hands and balance on his rump, then bounce forward. The idea seemed to be how far he could go, without his feet or hands touching the ground. Sometimes he made 20 feet. But what do they want with me? They must understand I can't stay here indefinitely. I will soon have to make a break for freedom. Not that I was mistreated in any way. One consolation was that the old man was coming closer every day, and was very interested in my snuff, watching me when I took a pinch of snuff. He seems to think it useless to only put it inside my lips. One morning, after I had my breakfast, both the old man and the boy came and sat around 10 feet from me. This morning I made coffee. I had saved up all dry branches I found, and I had some dry moss, and I used all the labels from cans to start a fire. I got my coffee pot boiling, and it was strong coffee too, and the aroma from boiling coffee was what brought them over. I was sitting eating hardtack, with plenty of butter on, and sipping coffee, and it sure tasted good. I was smacking my lips, pretending it was better than it really was. I set the can down that was about half full. I intended to warm it up later. I pulled out a full box of snuff, took a big chew. Before I had time to close the box, the old man reached for it. I was afraid he would waste it, and only had 2 more boxes. So I held on to the box, intending him to take a pinch like I had just done. Instead, he grabbed the box and emptied it in his mouth, swallowed it in one gulp, then he licked the box inside with his tongue. After a few minutes, his eyes began to roll over in his head. He was looking straight up. I could see that he was sick. Then he grabbed my coffee can, that was quite cold by this time. He emptied that in his mouth, grounds and all. That did no good. He stuck his head between his legs and rolled forward a few times, away from me. Then he began to squeal like a stuck pig. I grabbed my rifle. I said to myself, this is it. If he comes for me, I will shoot him plumb between his eyes. But he started for the spring. He wanted water. I packed my sleeping bag in my pack sack with the few cans I had left. The young fellow ran over to his mother. Then she began to squeal. I started for the opening in the wall, and just made it. The old lady was right behind me. I fired 1 shot over her head. I guess she had never seen a rifle fired before. She turned and ran inside the wall. I injected another shell in the barrel of my rifle and started downhill, looking back over my shoulder every so often to see if they were coming. I was in a canyon, and good travelling, and I made fast time. Must have made 3 miles in some world record time. I came to a turn in the canyon, and I had the sun on my left. That meant I was going south, and the canyon turned west. I decided to climb the ridge ahead of me. I knew that I must have 2 mountain ridges between me and saltwater, and by climbing this ridge, I would have a good view of this canyon, so I could see if the Sasquatch were coming after me. I had a light pack, and was making good time up this hill. I stopped soon after, to look back where I came from, but nobody followed me. As I came over the ridge, I could see Mount Baker, then I knew I was going in the right direction. I was hungry and tired. I opened my pack sack to see what I had to eat. I decided to rest here for a while. I had a good view of the mountainside, and if the old man was coming, I had the advantage, because I was up above him. To get me, he would have to come up a steep hill, and that might not be so easy, after stopping a few 30-30 bullets. I had made up my mind that this was my last chance, and this would be a fight to the finish. I rested here for 2 hours. It was 3 p.m. when I started down the mountainside. It was nice going, not too steep and not too much underbush. When I got near the bottom, I shot a big blue grouse. She was sitting on a windfall, looking right at me, only 100 feet away. I made it down the creek at the bottom of this canyon. I felt I was safe now. I made a fire between 2 big boulders, roasted the grouse. Next morning, when I woke up, I was feeling terrible. My feet were sore from dirty socks. My leg was sore, my stomach was upset from the grouse I ate the night before. I was not sure I was going to make it up that mountain. I finally made the top, but it took me 6 hours to get there. It was cloudy, visibility about a mile. I knew I had to go downhill. After about 2 hours, I got to the heavy timber and sat down to rest. I could hear a motor running hard at times, then stop. I listened to this for a while and decided the sound was from the gas donkey. Someone was logging in the neighbourhood. I told them I was a prospector and was lost. I did not like to tell them I had been kidnapped by a Sasquatch, as if I had told them, they would probably have said he is crazy too. The following day, I went down from this camp on Salmon Arm branch of Sechelt Inlet. From there, I got the Union boat back to Vancouver. This was my last prospecting trip, and my only experience with what is known as Sasquatches. I know that in 1924, there were 4 Sasquatches living. It might be only 2 now. The old man and the old lady might be dead by this time. Story 6 by Fred Beck. It is my intention in this book not only to tell you about the historic encounter I had with these mysterious creatures, but also reveal to the public what I believe they are. Truth is often stranger than fiction, but strangeness comes from the clouds surrounding our minds, not from the mystery itself. This is not a large book, but may the largeness be conveyed by the picture I hope to paint of truth. Much has been written about that day in 1924, and I feel it right that I express my views at last. To avoid embarrassment to the relatives of the other 4 men involved in the 1924 incident, I have not directly mentioned their names. The name, Hank, is a pseudonym of one of the main characters in the incident. First of all, I wish to give the account of the attack of the cabin, and will tell you of the famous incident of July 1924. We had been prospecting for 6 years, in the Mount St. Helens and Lewis River area, in southwest Washington. We had, from time to time, come across large tracks, like creek beds and springs. In 1924, I and 4 other miners were working our gold claim, the Vander White. It was 2 miles east of Mount St. Helens, near a deep canyon now called Ape Canyon, which was so named after an account of the incident reached the newspapers. Hank, a great hunter and woodsman, was always a little apprehensive after seeing the tracks. The tracks were large, and we knew no human animal could have made them. The largest measured 19 inches long. It was in the middle of July, and we had received a good assay on our claim, and everyone was excited. I remember I had a tooth was aching, and I suggested to Hank that he should take me over to see the dentist, but he was so enthused in the prospects of the gold mine that he barely took time to answer me. We had all come up in his Ford, and had no way to get back to town, unless he took me. So when he went back to our cabin, on the north side of the canyon, I had a nagging toothache, and little appetite for our evening meal of beans and hotcakes. Hank, although appreciative, was still determined. We had been hearing noises in the evening for about a week. We heard a shrill, peculiar whistling each evening. We would hear it coming from one ridge, and then hear an answering whistling from another ridge. We also heard a sound I could best describe as a booming, thumping sound, just like something was hitting itself on its chest. Hank asked me to accompany him to the spring, about 100 yards from our cabin, to get some water, and suggested we take our rifles, just to be on the safe side. We walked to the spring, and then Hank yelled and raised his rifle, and in that instant, I saw it. It was a hairy creature, and he was about 100 yards away, on the other side of the canyon, standing by a pine tree. It dodged behind the tree, and poked its head out from the side of the tree. At the same time, Hank shot. I could see the bark fly out from the tree, from each of his 3 shots. Some might say that was quite a distance to see the bark fly, but I saw it. The creature, I judged to have been about 7 feet tall, with blackish-brown hair, disappeared from our view for a short time, but then we saw it, running fast and upright, about 200 yards down the little canyon. I shot 3 times before it disappeared from view. We took the water back to the cabin, and explained the affair to the rest of the party, and we all agreed, including Hank, to go home the next morning, as it would be dark before we could get to the car. We agreed it would be unsound to be caught by darkness on the way out. Nightfall found us in our pine log cabin. We had built the cabin ourselves, and had made it very sturdy. It stood for years afterward, and was visited by many sightseers until a few years ago, when it was burned to the ground. The circumstances of the fire I do not recall. In the cabin, we had a long bunk bed, in which 2 could sleep, feet to feet, the rest of us sleeping on pine boughs on the floor. At one end of the cabin, we had a fireplace, fashioned out of rocks. There were no windows in the cabin, so darkness found us all in the cabin more calm now. We were sitting around, puffing on pipes, and talking about the trip home the next day. Each of us settled down into his trade, but welcome bed, and soon fell asleep. About midnight, we were all awakened. Hank, who was sleeping on the floor, was yelling and kicking, but the noise that had awakened us was a tremendous thud against the cabin wall. Some of the chinking had been knocked loose from between the logs, and had fell across Hank's chest. He had his rifle in his hand, and was waving it back and forth as he kicked and yelled. I helped get the chinking off him, and he jumped to his feet. Then we heard a great commotion outside. It sounded like a great number of feet trampling and rattling over a pile of unused shakes. We grabbed our guns. Hank squinted through the space left by the chinking. By actual count, we only saw 3 of the creatures together at any one time, but it sounded like there were many more. This was the start of the famous attack, of which so much has been written in Washington and Oregon papers through the years. Most accounts tell of giant boulders hurled against the cabin, and some even say through the roof, but this was not quite the case. There were very few large rocks around in that area. It's true that many smaller ones were hurled at the cabin, but they did not break through the roof, but hit with a bang and rolled off. Some did fall through the chimney of the fireplace. Some accounts say I was hit in the head by a rock and knocked unconscious. This is not true. The only time we shot our guns that night was when the creatures were attacking our cabin. When they would quiet down for a few minutes, we would quit shooting. I told the rest of the party that maybe if they saw we were only shooting when they attacked, they might believe we were only defending ourselves. We could have clear shots at them through the opening left, by the chinking, had we chosen to shoot. We did shoot, however, when they climbed up on our roof. We shot round after round through the roof. We had to brace the hewed hog door with a long pole, taken from the bunk bed. The creatures were pushing against it, and the whole floor vibrated from the impact. We responded by firing many more rounds through the door. They pushed against the walls of the cabin, as if trying to push the cabin over, but this was pretty much an impossibility. As previously stated, the cabin was a sturdy made building. Hank and I did most of the shooting. The rest of the party crowded to the far end of the cabin, guns in hands. Others had a pistol, which is still in my family's possession. The others clutched their rifles. They seemed stunned and incredulous. The attack continued the remainder of the night, with only short intervals between. A most profound and frightening experience occurred when one of the creatures, being close to the cabin, reached an arm through the chinking space and seized one of our axes by the handle. Before the thing could pull the axe out, I swiftly turned the head of the axe upright, so that it caught on the logs, and at the exact same time, Hank shot, barely missing my hand. The creature let go, and I pulled the axe back in, and put the axe in a safe place. A humorous thing I well remember Hank was saying was, "If you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, and we'll go home in the morning." He did not mean it to be humorous, for Hank was dead serious, and sang under the impression that mountain devils, as he called them, might understand and go away. The attack ended just before daylight. Just as soon as we were sure it was light enough to see, we came cautiously out of the cabin. It was not long before I saw one of the ape-like creatures, standing about 8 yards away, near the edge of Ape Canyon. I shot 3 times, and it toppled over the cliff, down the gorge, some 400 feet below. Then Hank said we should get out of there as soon as possible, and not bother to pack our supplies or equipment out. After all, he said, it's better to lose them than our lives. We were only too glad to agree. We brought only that which we could get in our backsacks. We left about $200 in supplies, powder and drilling equipment behind. I tried to persuade anyone not to relate the happenings to anyone, and they agreed, but Hank soon let the cat out of the bag. We made our way to Spirit Lake, and Hank went into the ranger station. He had told the ranger earlier about the tracks, and the ranger had replied, "Let me know if you find out what they are." That was just what Hank did, to the puzzlement of the ranger. When we were back home in Kelso, Washington, he told some of his friends, and somehow the story leaked out to the papers, and the Great Hairy Ape Hunt of 1924 was on. Local reporters interviewed us. They came from Portland and Seattle. Even a big game hunter from England came asking questions, and he had a large gun with him that must have been an elephant gun. Many people flocked to the Mount St. Helens area looking for the Great Hairy Apes, or Mountain Devils. I myself went back with 2 reporters, and a detective from Portland, Oregon. We found large tracks, and they photographed them. We did not see any of the ape men then, nor could we find the ones we had shot. So people were asking questions. Was it true? Was it a wild tale? I can assure you it is true. Are they human, animals, or devils? I will answer that question in this book. There was a great ape hunt in 1924, and over the last years, more and more people have reported seeing them. There is an ape hunt being revived again, and another book already written on the subject, and has formed a club whose purpose it is to prove the existence of what these are, and what they already believe. The abominable snowmen of America do exist. A wealthy person has offered a large sum of money for anyone that can capture one alive. Sightings have been reported in Canada, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. But the purpose of this book is not only to relate my experiences, but also to bring light upon my knowledge of the abominable snowmen. I do not wish to remark upon an expedition, but I want to tell what these beings are. Story 7 by Peter Byrne. According to the Indians, there was once a large number of Bigfeet living on Vancouver Island. A large island, 1,248 square miles, off of the coast of British Columbia. The Indians knew about them, feared them and respected them, but claimed they were harmless. One of the Indians of the Nootka tribe, who lived at Nootka in 1928, claimed to have been carried off by them and held captive for some time. This story, told to me by Father Anthony Terhar of Mount Abbey, Oregon, is a curious one. Father Anthony, a much-loved missionary priest, who travelled the west coast of Vancouver Island for many years, was living in Nootka at the time of the story, and he knew Muchalat Hari very well. Muchalat Hari was a trapper, and something of a rarity among his fellow tribesmen. He was, according to Father Anthony, a tough, fearless man, of excellent physique. In the course of his trapping, he was wont to spend long weeks in the forest alone, something that the average Indian did not do in these days. The Indians of the coast were apparently a rather timid people, and they seemed to regard the deep forest as the home and territory of the Bigfoot. When they went in the deep forest for any reason, they never went alone. Muchalat Hari was different from the other Indians. He went in the forest alone, and feared nothing. Late one autumn, Muchalat Hari set off for the woods, with his tracks and camping gear. His plan was to set out a tramp line and stay in the woods for several months. He headed for his favourite hunting area, the Conuma River, at the head of the Tulpana Inlet. From Nootka, he paddled his own canoe to the mouth of the Conuma. There he cached the canoe and headed upstream on foot. Apparently 12 miles upstream, he made his base camp and, after bringing himself a lean-to, started to put out his trap line. One night, while wrapped in blankets and clad only in underwear, he was suddenly picked up by a huge male Bigfoot and carried off into the hills. He was not carried very far, probably a distance of about 2 or 3 miles at most. When the daylight came, he was able to see he was in a sort of camp under the rock shelf and surrounded by some 20 Bigfoot. They were of all sexes and sizes. For some time, they stood around him and stared at him. The males to the front of the curious group, females behind them, and the young ones to the rear. Muchalat Hari was frightened at first, and his fear grew to terror when he noticed, he said, the large number of bones lying around the campsite. When he saw these, he was convinced the Bigfeet were going to eat him. The Bigfeet did not harm him in any way. Occasionally, one came forward and touched him, as if feeding him, and when they discovered that his skin was loose, it was in fact his woolen underwear, several came forward and pulled at it gently, clearly confused. While they looked at him and examined him, Muchalat Hari sat with his back to the rock room and did not move. He was cold and hungry, but his thoughts were only on escape. Sometime in the late afternoon, curiosity on the part of the Bigfeet seemed to slacken. With most of the Bigfeet out of the camp, probably food gathering, he thought there came the opportunity he needed. He leapt to his feet and ran for his life, never looking back. He ran downhill, where he guessed the river to be, and sure enough, he soon came to his campsite. In what must have been blind panic, he bypassed his camp and ran for 12 miles to where his canoe was cached, at the mouth of the Conuma. Father Anthony describes the story of Muchalat Hari's arrival at Nootka as follows. It was probably 3 in the morning. He and the brother Benedictines were asleep, and the village was lit. Suddenly, there was a series of wild cries from the waters of the inlet. Lighters were lit, and he and the others hurried down to the water's edge. There, near frozen and exhausted in his canoe, lay Muchalat Hari. He was barefoot, and clad only in his wet and torn underwear, and had paddled his canoe through the winter night, 45 miles from the mouth of the Conuma River. Father Anthony and his companions carried the almost lifeless form up the water's edge. It took 3 weeks to nurse Muchalat Hari back to sanity and good health. Father Anthony, who took him into his own care, did the nursing, and he told me that during the course of these 3 weeks, Muchalat Hari's hair turned to pure white. The story of the kidnapping came out slowly. At first, Muchalat Hari would talk to no one. Then he told Father Anthony what had happened, and later others. When he fully recovered to health, he was asked when he planned to go back to collect his belongings, the camp equipment, his pots and pans, his trap line, and above all, his rifle at the lean-to on the Conuma. In 1928, a trap line and all of its pieces must have been worth a great deal to an island Indian. A rifle alone would be regarded as a highly prized possession. But Muchalat Hari never went back to the Conuma, Not only did he never return there, according to Father Anthony, he never left the settlement of Nootka, never went in the woods again for the rest of his life. He preferred to lose all of his valuables, and probably hard-won possessions, than risk another encounter with the Bigfoot. Story 8 by William Rowe. Ever since I was a small boy, back in the forest of Michigan, I have studied the lives and habits of wild animals. Later, when I supported my family in northern Alberta by hunting and trapping, I spent many hours just observing the wild things. They fascinated me. But the most incredible experience I ever had was with a wild creature near a little town called Tate Jarwancash, British Columbia, about 80 miles west of Jasper, Alberta. I had been working on the highway near Tate Jarwancash for about 2 years. In October 1555, I decided to climb 5 miles up Meeker Mountain, to an old deserted mine, just for something to do. I came in sight of the mine about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after an easy climb. I had just to come out on a piece of low brush into a clearing when I saw what I thought was a grizzly bear, in the bush on the other side. I had shot a grizzly near that spot the year before. This one was only about 75 yards away, but I didn't want to shoot it, for I had no way of getting it out. So I sat down on a small rock and watched, my rifle in my hands. I could see part of the animal's head and the top of the shoulder. A moment later, it raised up and stepped out into the opening. Then I saw it was not a bear. This, to the best of my recollection, is what the creature looked like, and how it acted when it came across the clearing directly toward me. My first impression was of a huge man, about 6 feet tall, almost 3 feet wide, and probably weighing somewhere near 300 pounds. It was covered from head to foot with dark brown, silver-shaped hair, but as it came closer, I saw by its breasts that it was a female. And yet, its torso was not curved like a female's. Its broad frame was straight, from shoulder to tip. Its arms were much thicker than a man's arms, and longer, reaching almost to the knees. Its feet were broader proportionately than a man's, about 5 inches wide at the front, and tapering to much thinner heels. When it walked, it placed the heel of its foot down first, and I could see the grey-brown skin, or hide, on the soles of its feet. It came to the edge of the bush I was hiding in, within 20 feet from me, and squatted down on its haunches. Reaching out its hands, it pulled the branches of bushes toward it, and stripped the leaves with its teeth. Its lips curled flexibly around the leaves as it ate. I was close enough to see that its teeth were white and even. The head was higher at the back than at the front. The nose was broad and flat. The lips and chin protruded further than its nose. But the hair that covered it, leaving bare only the parts of its face around the mouth, nose and ears, made it resemble an animal as much as a human. None of this hair, even on the back of its head, was longer than an inch, and that on its face was much shorter. Its ears were shaped like a human's ears, but its eyes were small and black like a bear's, and its neck was also unhuman, thicker and shorter than any man's I had ever seen. As I watched this creature, I wondered if some movie company were making a film at this place, and that what I saw was an actor, made up to look partly human and partly animal. But as I observed it more, I decided it would be impossible to fake such a specimen. And anyway, I heard there was no such company near that area. Nor, in fact, did anyone live up Meeker Mountain, according to the people who lived in Tate Jarwancash. Finally, the wild thing must have got my scent, for it looked directly at me, through an opening in the bush. A look of amazement crossed its face. It looked so comical, at the moment, that I had to grin. Still in a crouched position, it backed up 3 or 4 short steps, then straightened up to its full height and started to walk away rapidly, back the way it came. For a moment, it watched me over its shoulder as if it were not exactly afraid, but as though it wanted no contact with anything strange. The thought came to me that if I shot it, I would possibly have a specimen of great interest to scientists the world over. I had heard stories of the Sasquatch, the great hairy Indians that live in the legends of British Columbia, and also many claim, are still in fact alive today. Maybe this was a Sasquatch, I told myself. I levelled my rifle. The creature was still walking rapidly away, again turning its head to look in my direction. I lowered my rifle. Although I have called the creature it, I felt now that it was a human being, and I knew I would never forgive myself if I killed it. Just as it came to the other patch of bush, it threw its head back and made a peculiar noise that seemed to be half laugh and half language, which I can only describe as a kind of whinny. Then it walked from the small bush into a strand of lodgepole pine. I stepped out into the opening and looked across the small ridge, just beyond the pine, to see if I could see it again. It came out on the ridge, a couple of 100 yards away from me, tipped its head back again, and again emitted the only sound I had heard it make. But what this half laugh, half language was meant to convey, I really don't know. It disappeared again, and I never saw it again. I wanted to find out if it lived on vegetation entirely, or ate meat as well, so I went down and looked for signs. I found it in 5 different places, and although I examined it closely, could find no hair or shells or books of insects, so I believe it was strictly a vegetarian. I found one place where it had slept for a couple of nights under a tree. Now, the nights were cool up the mountain, at this time of year especially, and yet it had not used a fire. I found no sign that it possessed even the simplest of tools, nor a single companion while in this place. Whether this was a Sasquatch, I do not know. It will always remain a mystery to me, unless another one is found. I hereby declare the above statement to be in any part true, to the best of my powers of observation and recollection. Signed, William Rowe. Story 9, by Bobby Short. This happened between Des Moines and Van Meter, Iowa, in Dallas County. It happened last summer, around July of 1999, at a campout with my friends. My house sits in front of a rather large patch of timber. Our freshman year of high school just got out for the summer vacation, and we were celebrating in the timber at the campout. It was just getting dark outside, so we decided to build the fire. The 4 of us finished our supper and were sitting around the fire just talking. Soon it was pitch black outside, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We got out our flashlights and decided to go to the tent we'd set up earlier. The next thing that happened, I'm not really sure about what time it was, but it was still dark out. We all woke up to the sound of rustling in the leaves. We assumed it was just a raccoon eating the leftover scraps of food, but then there was a strange grunting sound, something like some kind of sick cow or something, and a heavy, raspy breathing. Also, there was a reeking stench, almost like rotten eggs. We all thought it was someone playing a prank on us, but in the middle of the night? And how would they find us out here in the middle of the woods? We all went out of the tent to look around, sure it was nothing. As we unzipped the tent, the rustling stopped, and the breathing slowed down a little. And as we poked our heads out of the opening, we caught a glimpse of him. I am still not sure of what I saw that night. In proportion to the tree he was standing near when we saw him, his head came close to hitting the branch, which seems to be a little less than 7 feet tall. He was hairy and had reddish-brown fur. Once the 4 of us talked about what we saw, we had all seen the same thing. A glimpse of him walking away. I think he seemed maybe a little afraid of us, for reasons I do not know. He was far too away too distinctly to see his eyes. All I can tell you is that we only saw his backside, reddish-brown fur, and very tall. The woods we are located in are about 10 to 15 miles west of Des Moines, so I don't know how I could tell you exactly how to get to the exact spot where we were camping. I know approximately where. The timber is very thick back in there, so it's hard to say. The timber is behind my house, so it shouldn't be hard to find. If you need better instructions of the location, I can tell you road directions and such, but I would rather keep it anonymous, for publication reasons. As for the food he could have been attracted to, we had leftover bags of potato chips, hot dogs and buns, s'mores, chocolate bars, graham crackers, marshmallows, some fresh fruit. I can't think of anything else at this moment, just general snacks and food for open campfires. His body was pretty strange as to the proportion question. Big hands, tall, and large biceps and upper leg muscles from what I could tell, and long hair covered the whole of his body from what we could see. I can't remember a lot about the creature. He, or she I suppose, seemed very frightened at the sight of humans. He wasn't afraid of the campfire, it seemed. My guess is he was attracted to the fruit most likely. The fruit was the strongest smelling piece of food we had. Thank you for listening to these stories. If you want to hear more, including fictional stories, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell notification button, and check out my fictional stories and other creations, which will be linked here.